Many states and localities made grievous errors, quite insulting to firefighters, to doctors, to nurses. Some states have remediated and apologized. The state of New York actually has given jobs back to firefighters with back pay. I think this is a policy that we should promote. This vote will be on whether or not you agree with that. Offering a second-degree amendment doesn't get rid of the subject. It attempts to get rid of the subject by papering over it. It's a bit of legislative legerdemain to sort of say we're voting on something else, but we are voting on whether or not you think firefighters should be dismissed for not taking a vaccine. Many of the firefighting community actually, many of the firehouses objected to this, and actually it's a good thing that came from their collective bargaining. They resisted this in many different jurisdictions. But in some areas, the cities overrode the collective bargaining agreements and overrode the firefighters on this. There never really was any health reasons why you should have the youngest and fittest among us with a death rate of about 1 in a million forcing vaccines on them. Turned out the vaccine in the end didn't prevent transmission. The only thing that the studies finally concluded was that people at high risk could lower their risk of hospitalization and death, but just didn't reduce transmission. So there never really was an argument for others on this. One of the lasting legacies of our experience with COVID-19 will be the eroding credibility of government agencies. The CDC was consistently criticized for confusing and often contradictory guidance. Some of us did not find such an outcome surprising. Some of us expected it. But I think what shocked all of us was the discovery of how ruthlessly cruel government can be. The SAFER grant program is designed to provide federal support for staffing of fire departments. But over the last few years, even as these grants were awarded, firefighters around the country found themselves with a choice: submit to COVID vaccine mandates and submit to not exercising your First Amendment rights, or lose your livelihood. And this was no idle threat. We saw it with firefighters, we saw it with police, we saw it with doctors, we saw it with nurses, we saw it with our soldiers. Finally, people came together, and even those on the other side that had promoted these mandates finally said, enough's enough, and we got rid of the mandate on soldiers. There is some dispute over the nature of his departure, but former Detroit Fire Chief Eric Jones told the Detroit News he was forced out of his position because he would not submit to a vaccine requirement. Jones explained that he was not anti-vaccine, just unsure about the COVID-19 shot. He also said, I didn't want to leave, but I was given the option, take the shot or leave. And he wasn't alone. Firefighters were terminated in Salt River, Arizona, including Joseph Kimball, who has 6 children, and his wife is a stay-at-home mom. Over 100 firefighters were removed from duty without pay in Los Angeles alone. Seems bizarre and contradictory to provide financial support to increase fire department staffing when decisions were made to terminate trained and effective firefighters for no good reason. Firefighters tend to be young and fit, the very people who had the least worry about COVID-19. They also tend to be male, and large studies have now shown that young males are the group most likely to suffer the severe side effects of myocarditis. These people were never a threat to their communities. On the contrary, they served their communities bravely. Many of them served their communities for a year when there was no vaccine. They all went out. They did their job. They pulled people from fires. They saved people from accidents. They did all this while risking getting COVID, and many of them got COVID. What was the reward we gave them for doing their job when there was no vaccine and getting COVID? Fire departments fired them. A fire department that would let somebody go who did their job, already had COVID, already had a prior immunity, is not a fire department that should be getting our money. What was done to them, what was done to the police, what was done to the first responders was shameful. And we should stand together and make sure it never happens again. To that end, I offer an amendment that will restore sanity and compassion to the government. My amendment would make any fire department that terminated firefighters for refusing a COVID vaccine or for exercising First Amendment rights to oppose the mandates ineligible for these grants. But my amendment also includes an important exception. A fire department can become eligible for these grants again if the department offered to all such terminated individuals full reinstatement and back pay. If you want to support firefighters, if you really want to support your communities, if you want to support safety, you should support my amendment.
We will now proceed to consideration of Peter's second-degree amendment to Paul Amendment 3 to S 559. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema.
Aye.
Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
No.
Senator Johnson.
No by proxy.
Senator Langford. Senator Romney. Senator Scott.
No by proxy.
Senator Hawley. Senator Marshall.
No by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
I can't really hear you.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 7, the nays are 4. On the vote by proxy, the yeas are 1, the nays are 3. On this vote, the yeas are 8, the nays are 7, and the amendment is agreed to.
A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the second-degree amendment is agreed to.
I have another amendment, just 1 second. I thought you can only do 1 secondary amendment. What's that? I think I'll just wait. I'll wait and do that. All right.
I'm sorry.
I'll call Paul Amendment 4.
I'm sorry. Oh, so the Peter second-degree amendment to the Paul amendment is adopted.
They have to vote on the,
If there's no further debate on Paul Amendment 3, the question is on the adoption as modified by the Peter second-degree amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Majority of the members having voted in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to.
We'll call up Paul Amendment 4.
I would like to offer a second-degree amendment to Paul Amendment 4. So while I agree with Ranking Member Paul's intention to ensure that government entities of the People's Republic of China do not receive federal funds from the United States, this amendment could have serious unintended consequences. This amendment is not targeted enough to deal with legitimate national security and economic security issues between America and the Chinese government, which have been and certainly remain critical areas of bipartisan support on this committee. And I look forward to working with members of this committee on both sides of the aisle to find ways to hold China accountable and protect American interest. My second-degree amendment narrows the Paul Amendment by specifying that no entities in China are eligible to be a recipient or sub-recipient from the grant programs reauthorized in this bill, and I would urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this second-degree amendment and the underlying bill.
1 moment. Now, as I understand your
Senator Paul.
your second-degree amendment, you've said that you're narrowing it to that the grants in this bill would not fund NIH grants or any other grants in China. You're saying the grant money in this bill?
The grants from this bill, right.
Well, they don't. I mean, so that doesn't make any sense. You're saying that the fire grants would not.
No entities in China are eligible for the grants authorized in this bill.
Right. It doesn't make any sense because none of the grant money in this bill was going to NIH. So basically, it's a nonsensical second-degree amendment. But basically, we're doing this again, and this is sort of the legislative legerdemain to sort of obscure the fact and to try to not vote directly on this. But this is whether or not you want money to go from NIH to China and to fund gain-of-function research. We've actually discovered, and this was came out of intelligence report, unclassified report in November of this year, and this is extraordinary, that NIH money was not only going through EcoHealth Alliance to the tune of about $100 million being funneled to them, and then millions of that being funneled to Wuhan, but we also have discovered that American universities are subgranting NIH money to military research in China. So the initial argument was that, well, we're just doing civilian research over there, and Dr. Fauci and others said, oh, there's nothing wrong with this, this civilian research, and it's really not gain of function, although it might be. But it's worse than that. We found that UC Davis, Galveston, other of these universities are getting NIH grants, and then they're subcontracting them to military researchers. These are researchers that don't go by doctor, they go by general, they go by colonel, particularly in the People's Liberation Army. So this is a real problem. And the reason we bring up these amendments on the fire bill, you say, why are you bringing this up on the fire bill? Because we've had no hearings. We haven't had one hearing on this. The other side does not seem to care that probably half the scientific community now thinks this came from the lab. We've done nothing, no hearings on it. But we don't seem to care that we may well have funded this. One of my records requests that I still haven't gotten any Democrat to sign on to, including the chairman, we want to know whether DARPA in our Defense Department or DTRA, DTRA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, whether they've been funding military research in China, whether they've been funding gain-of-function research in China that could have led to this outbreak. These are routine government things. We happen to now know that DARPA was asked by the Wuhan Institute of Virology for money to take a coronavirus and insert a furin cleavage site into that coronavirus to make it more transmissible and more infectious for humans. We know that that happened. Why do we know? Not because any Democrat chairman have helped us. A whistleblower from somewhere in the government released that grant. It's a grant proposal. Why in the world we can't see grant proposals? Why we can't see unredacted stuff from HHS? It's not even classified stuff. They're refusing to give us unclassified stuff. So we put forth these amendments, but the response we get is legislative legerdemain. Let's try to hide this so we don't have to appear publicly to be voting against this. Let's vote on a secondary issue so we can try to obscure the fact that we're still in favor of funding Wuhan. We're still in favor of sending money to Wuhan. This administration has allowed the continuation of this. EcoHealth Alliance, who by all sort of estimations have done clearly illegitimate things and really should be forbidden from getting NIH money, just got more NIH money recently. So the thing is we've done absolutely nothing. 1 million Americans died. We've done no hearings on this, not one hearing, and we have gotten no help with getting records. The only records we have from our own government have come from Freedom of Information Act. That's where a federal judge forces our country. We rightly are critical of the Chinese for being opaque and for obscuring the origins and not giving us the early samples of the virus, and yet our own government won't. And so it leads to suspicions, were we funding all of this? Did we fund the actual origins of the virus? And maybe they don't want us to see the records because we actually funded the origins of this. We should want to do better, and I'm disappointed that at every turn what we get is complete and entirely united opposition to this. Since fiscal year 2019, the NIH awarded more than $13 million to recipients in China. In fact, everything we've learned since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're still actively funding research in China. Today, I'm offering this amendment to place important guardrails on the federal government's use of taxpayer dollars. For too long, entities like the NIH have placed their trust in the Chinese government, which is openly hostile to American freedoms and democracy. It's time we stop sending American tax dollars to an adversary that has shown time and time again it does not have our best interest in mind. I hope all the members of the committee will support this common sense amendment.
Thank you, Senator Paul. And as I've stated in the past and will continue to say, we will work with you on the issues that you have raised. But this bill before us is firefighting grants to support firefighters here in the United States. This amendment just narrows the amendment to make sure that entities in China are not eligible to be a recipient or sub-recipient of the grants that are actually provided in this particular bill. We will now proceed to the consideration of the Peters second-degree amendment to Paul Amendment 4 to S559. Clerk will call the roll.
Senator Carper.
Carper is a yes by proxy.
Senator Hassan.
Aye.
Senator Sinema. Aye. Senator Rosen. Senator Padilla. Senator Ossoff. Senator Blumenthal. Senator Paul.
No.
Senator Johnson.
No by proxy.
Senator Langford. Senator Romney.
No by proxy.
Senator Scott.
No by proxy.
Senator Hawley. Senator Marshall.
No by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 7, the nays are 3. On the vote by proxy, the yeas are 1, the nays are 4. On this vote, the yeas are 8, the nays are 7, and the amendment is agreed to.
Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the second-degree amendment is agreed to.
I'd like
The Peters
to,
second-degree amendment to Paul amendment is adopted.
I'd like to,
And there's no further debate on Paul Amendment 4. The question is on the adoption as modified by the Peters second-degree amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the amendment is agreed to.
I'd like to call up Scott Amendment 3.
We'll now proceed to consideration of Scott Amendment 3 to S559.
The underlying bill authorizes $15.7 billion over the next 7 years and increases the current levels by $130 million for the Fire Administration and $343 million for the fire grants programs, for a total increase of about $500 million. The overall program is about $15 billion, because this is, not an inconsequential amount of money in an era where we have over $1 trillion budgets. I'd like to replace the Scott Amendment with a second-degree amendment, which would be identical to the language of Paul Amendment 3. Paul Amendment 3 is the vaccine amendment, and earlier,
hold for a moment.
well, I still have the debate time. I'm still arguing my case. So earlier, the chair replaced my amendment with a secondary amendment because they were playing basically a legislative sort of prank on the American public, so the other side wouldn't have to vote directly on a vaccine amendment. So basically, we will do exactly the same thing and offer a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment. And this amendment will be my Amendment 3, which says that fire houses that fired people for vaccines would not be eligible for grants. We request a recorded vote.
I also have a second-degree amendment, and I recognize myself to offer a second-degree amendment. My second-degree
Point of
amendment
inquiry.
would direct
Point of
GAO
inquiry.
to issue an audit of the U.S. Fire Administration
Point of inquiry.
within 3 years of enactment to continue improving controls.
Point of inquiry.
Yes, go ahead.
We have, unlimited second-degree amendments?
We have a second-degree amendment. I recognize myself for my second-degree amendment.
Your second-degree amendment to a second-degree amendment. So we
No,
have
it's a
unlimited-
second-degree amendment is being offered to the Scott Amendment.
No, I already called up a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment.
You can't call it up, Senator. Only the chair can call it up.
Well, I was recognized to call it up the same way we have recognized for every other amendment. You recognized me and I called it up.
You recognize to call up for a vote. Only a chair can do that.
Well, I was recognized to introduce an amendment, and I introduced a second-degree amendment. I don't know how you can stop that or decide that the rules are that you can do
The chair
unlimited
can call up
second-degree.
the amendments as the chair sees fit, and my second-degree amendment is being called up.
After my second-degree amendment had already been called up. So you're offering,
not been called
you're
up.
offering a third-degree amendment.
It had not been called up.
Well, sure you are.
I am offering an amendment to the
And I would say,
Scott
if
Amendment.
this is the way you're going to run the committee, I would suggest that the Republicans leave. I don't see why we should stick around if you're going to make up the rules. I mean, you're
These
going to
are not
offer a
rules.
third-degree amendment?
Chairman.
These are not.
Chair,
Senator Sinema.
Mr. Chair, might I humbly suggest that
we can work through these procedural issues to take all of the votes. And I would just suggest we all take a couple minutes, lower the temperature, and just figure out what the procedure is and follow it. There's no need for us to turn this committee hearing into a partisan, ugly place like we've seen in other committees. We don't need to do that.
This is the first time we've had a hearing since I've been here that I know of where we've gotten second-degree amendments on every one of our amendments to avoid voting on the amendment. So we simply have done the same thing by offering a second-degree amendment to the Scott Amendment. It was offered from this microphone after I was recognized to offer it, and now they're going back on it and trying to change the rules. I, for one, won't stay here and would recommend that no Republicans stay here if we're going to have third-degree amendments that only the majority gets to
Well,
offer.
Senator Paul, might I suggest that we just take a moment, ask those who understand the rules of the committee to just explain it to all of us, and then we'll follow them. We don't have to escalate this to a situation where folks are walking out. We can just ask folks who can explain the rules to us, and then we'll follow them. I think
Who
we
will
could
we
do that.
ask? Just the majority staff?
No, let's consult with folks. I mean, the rules of the committee are written down. We can follow them. I just don't think that we don't need to escalate this to become a spectacle. Everyone can have their votes and we can move forward.